many more. He, of course, raises important issues. Of course, the border issues, of course, between Northern Ireland and Ireland are, of course, different. We have different arrangements, rightly so, that reflect our long shared history. But we also have very close cooperation, and we have close policing cooperation, we have close information sharing, we do have additional information sharing that isn't currently possible under the arrangements we've inherited with other European countries, and I think it's really important that those information sharing arrangements continue, and hopefully we can build on them with other European partners as well.
Pam Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I share her astonishment at the scale of the mismanagement of the asylum system by the previous government. My constituency in Colchester has hosted many asylum seekers and indeed refugees over the years. We're a city of sanctuary. Our local authorities have played a full part in supporting that work. But may I ask the Home Secretary, will she confirm that those local authorities will be fully engaged in work going forward to ensure we've got more effective support systems? Thank you.
My honourable friend is right to raise the importance of working closely with local authorities. We are determined to do that. My right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, already has work in chain looking at how we can better have work and cooperation between the Home Office and the local authorities. And it is also important to recognise that really through very many generations, refugees have come to this country and have contributed to our economy, to society, and been a hugely important part of that. It is partly because it's so important that we have that history that it's also so crucial to get the whole system functioning again instead of the chaos that we've got at the moment, which just undermines everybody's confidence.
Oliver Ryan.
I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. The people of Burnley, Padiham and Briarfield want to see these crossings stopped and these gangs smashed, and will welcome her tough action today. Because of the previous government's complete failure to control our borders, they spent millions of pounds a week on asylum hotels. What will she do to speed up the processing of people in those hotels and end their use?
We have to do all of these things, Mr. Speaker. We have to, and I welcome the honourable member to Parliament too. We have to have the action on the criminal gangs who are exploiting the situation in the first place, and that does involve much stronger cooperation with other European colleagues. And that it must include the new counter-terror powers that will be in the new legislation as part of the King's speech to strengthen the powers against organised immigration crime. But alongside, we've also just got to get the basics right. We've actually got to start taking decisions again, as well as speeding up the asylum decisions and making the system work again.
That completes that statement. Let the front benches change over. Right, we now come to the next statement. I call Ellie Reeves, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, the 19th of July, we saw a CrowdStrike software update on Microsoft systems result in a major global IT outage. It caused significant impacts around the world. Impacts were seen in the transport sector, with flights grounded in Europe, the US, and delays and cancellations here in the UK. On rail, live departure boards were impacted during the morning rush hour, and some media outlets lost the ability to provide live coverage. This caused substantial inconvenience for passengers hoping to travel for the summer holiday getaway on the busiest travel weekend of the year. Airports and airlines across the UK had measures in place to maintain safe operations, support passenger welfare, extend operating hours and deploy additional staff to support late-running operations to keep people moving where possible. As with all incidents, the sector will review their response and implement any learnings. More concerningly, large parts of the local UK healthcare system lost access to test results and appointment information, affecting mostly GP services. Tried and tested NHS contingency plans were enacted, and services are expected to be operating at full capacity in the next few days. Small businesses without dedicated IT support systems were heavily impacted due to disruption to card-only payment systems and ATMs, with many resorting to operate with cash only while firms worked to fix their systems. Many firms were able to get back online quickly, and the remaining are expected to restore operations this week. Officials from the National Cyber Security Centre quickly established the outages were not as the result of either a security incident or malicious cyber activity. The cause was instead identified to be a flawed CrowdStrike software update which caused Windows machines to crash. On Friday morning, CrowdStrike issued guidance on how to solve the problem, giving users a manual fix for each affected device or system. I now believe CrowdStrike is in the process of implementing an automated update which can be applied remotely and should therefore speed up recovery. However, there are still residual impacts from the failed update, and it's important that we continue to monitor the situation and the longer-term impacts to UK sectors and secondary impacts from international disruption. Ever since the incident occurred, the government has worked closely with both Microsoft and CrowdStrike. My Cabinet Office officials have been leading coordination of the government response across all impacted sectors of the economy. This included close monitoring of affected public services to ensure business continuity plans were enacted and services were supported as they came back online. 2 COBRA senior officials meetings were also convened on Friday to coordinate the response, and officials from across Her Majesty's government met over the weekend to continuously monitor the impacts and the recovery process. I'm pleased to say that government services and the online services that government provides were and remain largely unaffected. My colleagues, including the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the Health Secretary and Transport Secretary, attended briefings with officials throughout, and the Prime Minister was kept informed. The majority of the sectors that were impacted have now mostly recovered. The UK transport system, aviation, rail, road, maritime is running normally. NHS staff worked hard over the course of Friday and the weekend to quickly apply the fixes required, and my colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care have confirmed that systems are now back online, including for GPs. Their advice is that patients should continue to attend their appointments unless told not to. There may still be some delays, and GPs will need to rebook appointments that could not be made during the IT outage. The public should continue to contact their GPs in the normal way. However, as IT systems are complex, we can expect that minor disruption will continue in some areas while systems continue to recover, but my officials expect these to be resolved in the next couple of days. I'd like to extend my thanks to everyone who has worked so hard to get systems up and running again, and all staff who have worked tirelessly to support individuals impacted by the outage. Following this incident, the Cabinet Office will work with the National Cyber Security Centre and other partners across government to review the lessons learned. The Central Digital and Data Office will work with the NCSC to implement any improvements to the existing response plans to cover both technical resilience features as well as cyber. The COBRA unit will work with departments to support their processes for establishing how the organisations and sectors they represent manage the impacts of the outage and what lessons have been learnt. As soon as this government was elected, we took immediate steps to begin legislating to protect public services and the third-party services they use. Our Cyber Security and Resilience Bill, including in the King's Speech, will strengthen our defences and ensure that more essential digital services than ever before are protected. For example, it will look at expanding the remit of the existing regulation, putting regulators on a stronger footing, and increasing reporting requirements to build a better picture in government of cyber threats. Technology failures can be as disruptive as cyber attacks, and the move to create the Centre for Digital Government within DCIT is aimed at creating a more resilient digital public sector. What this incident shows is how dependent the modern world is on complex and interconnected IT systems, and how essential preparedness for such events is, including business continuity planning. Notwithstanding the immense frustration and inconvenience the outage has caused, I'm pleased to see that effective contingency plans mitigated the potentially very, very serious impacts this outage could have had. I'm pleased also that there is to be a comprehensive process to identify the lessons from this episode. I hope these will lead to improvements which both help prevent similar incidents and further improve our resilience to system outages and the impacts they can have. And in this spirit, Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Oliver Dowden.
Well, may I begin by welcoming the Honourable Lady to her role and thank her for her advanced state of the statement. In that role, I know she will be supported by a dedicated team of civil servants who represent the very best of public service, and I have no doubt that they will serve her as well as they did me. But she will also be aware of the enormous challenges facing this government and governments around the world in relation to cybersecurity. As I warned when I was the responsible minister, threats to public services and critical national infrastructure come from a range of challenges, from hostile state actors to human error and design flaws. Last week, we saw these challenges vividly brought to life. Following the corrupted antivirus update by CrowdStrike on Friday, 8.5 million Microsoft devices globally were rendered unusable. This left airports disrupted, patient records temporarily lost, and GPs unable to access important patient data, creating significant backlogs. This is more than an inconvenience, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to pay tribute to all those working in our public services for the efforts they undertook over the weekend to restore these services, and to the work of dedicated cyber specialists across government, including in the National Cyber Security Centre. In government, we undertook a wide range of measures to enhance the nation's cybersecurity, creating the National Cyber Security Centre, introducing Secure by Design, setting cyber resilience targets, launching GovAssure, and transforming the oversight of governmental cybersecurity. And now I note, as the Honourable Lady said, that the government intends to build on this progress by bringing forward a cyber security and resilience bill. Will the Minister therefore outline the timetable for this bill? And will the government consider mandatory cyber security targets for the UK public sector? And is the government considering obligations to ensure that infrastructure is designed to be resilient against common cause problems such as this one? What steps are being taken to enhance cybersecurity in the devolved administration and in parts of the public sector such as the NHS, which are operationally independent? And specifically in relation to this incident, what assessment has been made of the prevalence of CrowdStrike within critical national infrastructure? And what further reassurances can the government give in relation to the timetable for full recovery of key systems and data? In particular, can the Minister assure employees that this month's payroll will not be adversely affected? Britain's cyber industry is world-leading. Cybersecurity now employs over 60,000 people and brings in nearly £12 billion worth of revenue annually. This transformation was in part due to our £5.3 billion investment, which launched the country's first national cybersecurity strategy. I therefore urge the government, and I see the Chancellor in her place, to continue such investment. Incidents such as CrowdStrike should not deter us from the path of progress. We must embrace digitalisation and the huge improvements in public services that it offers. Indeed, the adoption of artificial intelligence across government is the closest thing we have to a silver bullet for public sector productivity. However, if we are to command public confidence, people must be assured that technology is safe, secure, and reliable. And incidents such as this demonstrate how reliant the government and public services are on large technology companies and how much responsibility they have for the services that have become critical to people's lives and livelihoods. That's why, in government, I called for us to work more closely with leading technology firms to address these shared challenges. The best solution is partnership. So to that end, what further engagement will the Minister undertake with Microsoft and CrowdStrike and the wider sector to ensure there is no such recurrence? The task for us all is to build on existing progress that has transformed Britain's cyber defences and to enhance protections for British families, businesses, and indeed the very heart of government. And in that mission, the government can rely on the support of these benches.
I thank the Shadow Minister for his contribution and his questions, and particularly I would echo the thanks to all of those involved across the civil service and departments in dealing with the outage last Friday and mitigating the effects of it. I set out in my opening comments that our cybersecurity and resilience bill, which was included in the King's speech, will strengthen our defences and ensure that more digital services are protected, and that is a priority for this government. The bill will look at expanding the remit of existing regulation, putting regulators on a stronger footing and increasing reporting requirements so that we can build a better picture in government of cyber threats. And we'll also consider the implications of Friday's incident as we develop that legislation. But rest assured that we are working across government in relation to this to ensure resilience. As the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said in his statement on the COVID Inquiry Module 1 report, he will lead a review to assess our national resilience against the full range of risks that the UK faces, and that includes cyber risks.
Chion Mora.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a great pleasure to see the Minister in her place. As she said, the CrowdStrike outage is a reminder of the way in which technology is so integrated into our lives, making all our lives better, but also our dependence on standards of development, deployment and integration of new technology, which are largely not visible to us. I was reassured to hear of the steps that government and businesses have been taken to mitigate the impact, but I fear that small businesses and consumers do not have the same resources. So could the Minister tell us, or does she agree, that you shouldn't have to be able to reboot from a blue screen in order to enjoy the benefits of technology? And will her government move to ensure that consumers are better protected?
Go ahead.
I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and also want to acknowledge all of the work that she has done in this area. It has been hugely valuable. She makes some really important points about making sure that consumers and small businesses are protected, as well as government departments and bigger business, and I'm sure that will be form part of the lessons learned from this incident, but also feed in to the bill that we'll be introducing.
Daisy Cooper.
Deputy Speaker, it's my first opportunity to welcome ministers to their places, and thank you for advance sight of the statement. I want to focus on the impact on the NHS in particular, and I'm sure my thanks and that of the entire House goes to all NHS staff who've been scrambling to deal with urgent inquiries from distressed patients. I wonder if I might press ministers for assurances on two particular patient groups who suffer from the need for time-critical care. First of all, there are some patients who always require blood test results before they commence urgent treatment or operations, and I wonder if there are any assurances on what attention they've been given by the NHS, both now and in any future scenarios. And secondly, those patients who are at extreme risk of getting an extremely ill version getting extremely ill from getting COVID. Since the last government scrapped the COVID medicines delivery unit, many vulnerable patients have been struggling to get the COVID antivirals they need from their GPs in time. That situation is made much worse when this kind of disruption happens. I wonder if you could provide any assurances about any attention that NHS England has given to these two patient cohorts, and if not, whether she might be willing to meet with me to discuss what we might do in future.
I thank the honourable member for her question and highlighting the issues facing vulnerable patients. I'm pleased to report that there were no reported impacts to 111 or 999 services and that patients were able to acknowledge emergency care if required. The majority of the impact to GP services were accessing patient records, GP appointments and prescriptions. Patients who couldn't access GP appointments were able to attend urgent care services and GPs were able to issue paper prescriptions, but I will pass on her concerns to my colleagues in the Department of Health because they are incredibly important issues and we need to make sure that vulnerable patients are protected going forward.
Pamela Nash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome both you to your very temporary position and also to my honourable friend on the front bench, welcome her to her role. I'd like to ask if there's any further detail that the Minister could share with the House on the particular impact of this outage in Scotland and ask her what conversations her department have had with the Scottish Government in recent days.
Thank you, and I welcome my honourable friend back to the House. It's fantastic to see her in her place, and rightly so. Thank you for the points that you have raised. They are very important and will be taken into account with the lessons learned.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I commend the Minister on her appointment. Does she agree with me that these events demonstrated that we are very far from being in a position to move into a cashless society? And given that the Chancellor is in her place, will she confirm that her government will do everything that it can to support the continued use of cash, which is so important to some of the most vulnerable people in our society?
I thank the honourable member for that point. Cash remains the second most commonly used form of payment in the UK, and we remain committed to ensuring access to cash for individuals and businesses. That's why we have got a commitment to 350 banking hubs so that cash remains available to people. Thank you.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to welcome the Minister to place, particularly sat alongside the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I welcome the points that have been made with regard to resilience in public services, but can the Minister assure me that similar efforts are being made to ensure resilience when it comes to IT with regard to defence?
I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and as I said in answer to a previous question, as soon as this government was elected, we took immediate steps to start legislating to better protect all our public services and the third-party services that they use through the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, which will be coming to Parliament.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I first of all welcome the Minister to her place, and I think congratulations are due to the Honourable Lady, for I understand the Honourable Lady was in charge of the elections for the Labour Party, so much of the success that there was over there, the Honourable Lady can take some credit for that. It's good to see a reward for the endeavours for hard work. Well done. When it comes to airlines, 171 flights cancelled, of which some of my constituents were stuck in London, couldn't get home to Belfast. When it came to banks, some of my constituents were out in the shops. They were buying their goods and they found their credit cards didn't work because the system was down. When it comes to the health system, and just to give you some effective, and the Department of Health in Northern Ireland said that hospital services in around 2/3 of GP surgeries faced problems. There was problems with patients in operating theatres, accessing staff rosters, and the whole system was an absolute chaos. So can I ask the Honourable Lady this question? Yeah, if I can. Does the Minister not agree that the issue has underlined the necessity of ensuring that we are prepared for cyber breakdown, whether that is intentionally done as an attack or unintentionally done? And would the Minister outline perhaps our preparedness for situations such as this, as well as our resilience in moving forward from those type problems for all parts of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his kind comments. And can I just say that I'm sorry to learn of his constituents who were unable to get flights home or were unable to get GP appointments. I've talked in the statement about resilience going forward and making sure that we expand our cyber resilience, putting regulators on a stronger footing and getting a clear picture of cyber threats and how they can be dealt with. And he raises some very important points about that.
House.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This was an extremely serious incident, which I suspect may well be detectable in the next GDP figures that we see coming out of the ONS. But I had two questions. In her statement, the Honourable Lady said she was pleased to say that government services and the online services that government provides were and remain largely unaffected. Could you just tell us which were in fact affected, or was largely just a euphemism for not affected at all? And secondly, it's quite difficult for members to get a handle on the full impact and spread of this particular contagion. Will she commit to lay in the House some kind of report that details the sectors that were affected, how seriously they were affected, including government systems, and whether and how there will be any resolution in the future? Because obviously we need to report to our constituents that in future these things are less likely to occur.
I set out the impact that the incident had on, for example, GP services, but things like the emergency services remained unaffected as far as we are aware. We are undergoing the lessons learned from the incident, and I'm sure we'll report back on that once that's been completed.
Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. GPs in my constituency of Maidenhead were affected on Friday like so many others, and I'd like to thank them for the work they did when, even though patients weren't able to get test results and appointments were missed, they managed to make sure that people received the best care possible. What assurances can the Minister give me about the lessons learnt from Friday so that patients can continue to receive the care they need when they need it?
I welcome the honourable gentleman to the House and place on record my thanks to the GP surgeries in Maidenhead who have done what they can to make sure that disruption for patients were at a minimum. We will be undertaking the lessons learned exercise from this, which I hope will offer some reassurances to his constituents along with the bill that will be going through Parliament.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm aware that the Minister is new to her role, so I'm going to ask her to consider things rather than to commit to doing things. Will she please consider continuing with the annual statement to Parliament on civil contingencies and risks that was committed to by the previous government? Will she also consider, when she's looking at the cyber security and resilience bill, assessing whether there is widespread use of certain software or hardware that could cause mass outages in the event that it is affected, such as in CrowdStrike? I'm not aware that we've seen a kind of analysis of that in previous outputs by the Cabinet Office, and I think it would be incredibly helpful for us to be aware of where those risks are.
I thank the honourable member for those suggestions and very happy to consider the points that she has raised.
I cannot be the only member who thinks how proud Mr and Mrs Reeves must be today. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
King's Speech, motion for an address, adjourned debate on question.
Now, I inform the House that Mr Speaker has selected Amendment H in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. The question is that an humble address be presented to His Majesty as on the order paper. I call Jeremy Hunt to move the amendment.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the amendment in the name of myself and the Leader of the Opposition. It is an important and rather painful part of our democracy that I am today as Shadow Chancellor responding to the King's speech in exactly the same way the new Chancellor responded to me just a few months ago. So I want to start by congratulating her as well as Mr. and Mrs. Reeves. As the father of 2 girls myself, one of whom has her 10th birthday today, I warmly welcome the smashing of a glass ceiling with Britain's first female Chancellor. As I said on election night, she has led the Labour Party on a difficult journey which has changed it for the better. Her stated commitment to fiscal responsibility, stability and economic growth has been consistent and I'm sure not always easy. Unfortunately for us, her success in holding the line means we face rather a lot of Labour MPs on the government benches, but I wish her well in her new role. I also commend to her the superb Treasury officials she now inherits and want to put on record my gratitude to them for the excellent work they did for me, staying up in the middle of the night ahead of fiscal events, engaging in tense negotiations with spending departments, and occasionally, it has to be said, number 10, bringing me endless flat whites and Pret lunches to keep me going, and most of all, making my family feel welcome in the goldfish bowl that is Downing Street. And it is part of the magic of democracy that those same officials have seamlessly transferred their allegiance from me to her, and I know they will serve her extremely well. Now, in opposition, we won't oppose for its own sake, and there are a number of bills we welcome in the King's speech. She's right to focus on growth, and the improvements on planning build on many reforms introduced by the last government, including the 110 growth measures I introduced in last year's autumn statement. Any boost to house building is also welcome. We delivered 1 million homes in the last Parliament, and she will soon find out that if she's to deliver 1.5 million, she won't be able to duck reforming environmental regulations, a change which Labour blocked in the last Parliament, but which will deliver an extra 100,000 homes. But I caution her not to over-rely on bringing back top-down targets. In the end, we will only build more houses if we change attitudes to new housing, and that is unlikely to happen if unpopular targets are steamrolled through local communities. We'll also look carefully at her proposed budget responsibility bill. We're proud that a Conservative government set up the OBR, and I commend the work of Richard Hughes and his team. We didn't always agree, but that in the end is the point of an independent watchdog. And we all understand the politics of a bill that allows the government to make endless references to the mini-budget. But if she's really committed to fiscal responsibility alongside growth, I hope she will today confirm she will not fiddle with the 5-year debt rule to allow increased debt through the back door. We, and it has to be said, markets will be monitoring the overall level of debt very carefully to make sure that doesn't happen. And I also hope she commissions the OBR to do 10-year forecasts of our long-term growth rate rather than 5 years as at present, in order to bake long-term decision-making into Treasury thinking. I am very happy to give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Grateful to the Shadow Chancellor for giving way. He was talking about fiscal responsibility just now. During the election campaign, he committed to a series of tax cuts. I noticed yesterday on the Laura Kuenssberg show that he said that it wouldn't have been possible for him to proceed with those tax cuts. What is it that has changed, and why did he make that commitment during the election campaign, knowing full well that he couldn't afford to carry it out?
For the Honourable Gentleman for making that intervention, because it allows me to explain why he's completely mistaken in what he is saying. We offered a set of carefully funded tax cuts, fully funded tax cuts, unlike the £38.5 billion of unfunded spending commitments that came from the Labour Party. But we always said they would be brought in over time, over the next Parliament. We did not make a commitment that they would come in immediately. and indeed they would not have, but we would have done so in a responsible way. But when it comes to dubious claims, there are some rather dubious ones the new Chancellor has herself been making that do not withstand scrutiny. Now, she says, for example, that the economy would have been £140 billion bigger if we'd matched the average OECD growth rate. But as she knows, the OECD is a very diverse group of 38 countries, including many with economies very different to our own, such as Turkey or Mexico or Luxembourg. And a much more meaningful comparison is with other similar G7 economies, where, since 2010, we've grown faster than France, faster than Italy, faster than Germany, and faster than Japan. Indeed, the IMF say that thanks to difficult measures taken by the last Conservative government, we will grow faster than any of those 4 countries, not just in the short term, but over the next 6 years. And one of the reasons for that is our record on attracting investment. Since 2010, greenfield foreign direct investment has been higher in the UK than anywhere in the world except the United States and China. In the last year alone, Nissan, JLR, Tata, BMW Mini, Google and Microsoft have all been voting for the UK with their dollars. And that is not least because of cuts in business taxation, such as full expensing, introduced by the last government. If she now looks for backdoor ways to increase business taxation, as many fear she will risk the very attractiveness of the UK to foreign investors, of which she is now the beneficiary. I give way to the Honourable.
To the right honourable gentleman for giving way. This point of investment is very important for my constituents in Stockton North, where we have many companies poised to invest billions of pounds in industrial investment, and they tell me that they prize economic stability above all else. And so I wonder if he might commit now to supporting the Budget Responsibility Bill to give those investors the security that they would need.
Yeah. Well, we are going to study the bill very carefully when it's published. But yes, we are minded to support it, subject to having had a close look at it, because we think it's perfectly sensible. Whether it's completely necessary or not is a different question, but it's perfectly sensible. Now, but I do want to move on to some elements of the King's speech about which we have grave concerns. Bills which a Times editorial this week described as a dose of traditional socialist dogma. Tony Blair came to office having removed the old Clause 4 of the Labour Party constitution because he knew that state-run businesses are rarely successful and usually end up being bailed out by the taxpayer. But with its railway and energy plans, the government last week brought forward more nationalisation than Blair ever did, indeed more than any government in modern times. And I just say to her, if she really cares about fiscal responsibility, she should beware. The reason unions like publicly owned utilities is that it gives them more leverage on pay and more ability to demand bailouts. Unlearning the lessons of history will mean more strikes and bigger bills for the taxpayer. An even bigger concern for business is the impact on jobs of Labour's New Deal for workers. Since 2010, we have seen the creation of almost 4 million jobs, nearly 800 jobs, for every single day Conservative governments were in office. The President of the CBI described the UK as a job creation factory, but like many others, he expressed concerns that the Deputy Prime Minister's new Labour laws could put that at risk. Day one rights sound attractive, but employers fear it will mean a flood of tribunal claims, meaning it's safer not to offer a job at all. That's why the Federation of Small Businesses responded to the King's speech by saying companies were worried about increased costs and risks. In the end, Madam Deputy Speaker, French-style labour laws will lead to French levels of unemployment, which are nearly double our own, indeed close to what they were when the last Labour government was in office. By contrast, Conservatives have nearly halved unemployment over the last 14 years, and it would be a tragedy for working families up and down the country if the new government turned the clock back. Finally, the most dubious claim that we have heard of all is this nonsense about the worst economic inheritance since the Second World War, which everybody knows is just a pretext for long-planned tax rises. You can see what nonsense this is from a simple comparison to the last time we had a change of party running the government in 2010. Inflation then was 3.4% compared to 2% today. Unemployment was at 8% compared to 4.4% today. Growth was forecast at the time to be one of the slowest in the G7 compared to the fastest today. Instead of an economy where markets and the pounds were facing meltdown, she has inherited one which the ONS said growth was going gangbusters. And since the election, that has been backed up by even more data. May's GDP figures show Britain's growth was double the rate predicted by economists, the fastest in more than 2 years. New figures from S&P show that in February, British businesses were amongst the most optimistic in the world. Top of the league again, according to the ONS. Inflation has remained at the target 2% level. Now, in her BBC interview yesterday, the Chancellor, old habits die hard, glossed over those figures, putting on the most shocked expression she could muster to pretend that public finances are worse than she expected. But the root cause of the pressure on public finances, £400 billion of pandemic support, £94 billion of cost of living support, was never a secret. Indeed, the Labour Party supported those measures and in some cases called for us to go further. Nor were the difficult decisions we had to take to pay for them a secret either. When we had to increase borrowing, increase tax and reduce spending plans in the autumn statement of 2022, Labour did not oppose us. Like all chancellors, she faces fiscal challenges. Welcome to the job. But let me tell her, that job is a whole lot easier because faced with an economic crisis 2 years ago, Conservatives took decisions that her predecessor Labour government ducked completely after the financial crisis. And that's why she has a deficit of 4.4% this year compared to 10.3% left behind for the Conservatives in 2010. And she didn't just compare her inheritance to 2010. She claimed, Madam Deputy Speaker, to have the worst inheritance since the Second World War. Is she really saying that she faces conditions worse than Geoffrey Howe in 1979 with a winter of discontent, stagflation, 83% top rate of tax, and a Labour government that went with a begging bowl to be bailed out by the IMF? And she knows perfectly well herself that claim is nonsense. Otherwise, why, in her first week, would she announce £7.3 billion of spending on her National Wealth Fund without a spending review, without a budget, and without any external validation from the OBR? As Paul Johnson of the IFS says, thanks to the OBR, the nation's books are wide open and fully transparent, so pretending things are worse than expected, his words, really won't wash. And as she establishes her reputation, it is surely unwise to base your big central argument on a claim so patently ridiculous. But we all know exactly why she's doing it. She wants to lay the ground for tax rises that she has been planning all along. And that leads to two major concerns on this side of the House. The first is this. She says her number one mission is growth. But all around the world, evidence suggests countries with higher taxes tend to grow more slowly. Lower taxes, when funded properly, boost growth, as we saw with full expensing and the national insurance cuts last year, both of which the OBR confirmed add to our GDP. But keeping taxes down is hard work. I saw the numbers she's seeing just a few weeks ago, and the official advice was clear. With public sector pay restraint, productivity plans, such as we announced in the budget, and welfare reform, it's perfectly possible to balance the books without tax rises. Not easy, but government never is, but not impossible. Yet all those three things, pay restraint, productivity improvements and welfare reform were glaringly omitted from the King's speech. Instead, she's chosen an easier path. What Labour Party sources told The Guardian was a doctor's mandate to raise taxes. Now, she's ruled out raising income tax, national insurance and VAT, but she shouldn't think for one second that other tax rises will not impact working people. Capital gains tax destroys the pensions people build up over their lifetime. Business tax rises are passed on to customers, leading to higher bills, and taxes on banks and energy companies lead to fewer companies operating in the UK, a lower tax take, and less money for public services like the NHS. And that, to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the biggest contradiction in this new programme. A government that says it wants the fastest growth in the G7, but plans tax rises in the very same breath that will make that growth harder, if not impossible, to achieve. But even if such an approach is misconceived, it is nonetheless a legitimate choice for a governing party. What is not acceptable is just 18 days after the election to be laying the ground for tax rises after she promised us 50 times in the election campaign she had no plans to raise them. Every Labour government in history has raised taxes and raised spending. If she wanted to do the same, she should have had the courage to make the case for that before the election. Instead, she is softening us up for a colossal U-turn that will lead to lower growth, less money for public services and massive public anger, which is why I commend to the House the amendment in the opposition's name.
The original question was that a humble address be presented to His Majesty, as on the order paper, since when Amendment H has been proposed, as on the order paper. The question is that the amendment be made. The Chancellor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure to open today's King's Speech debate on behalf of His Majesty's Government. And I always enjoy debating the Right Honourable Gentleman, though I must say I rather prefer doing it from this side of the chamber. I appreciate his generous words on my appointment and also his tribute to officials who I can confirm are indeed first-rate. It has been over 14 years since a Labour government was in office for a state opening of Parliament. 14 years of chaos, 14 years of economic irresponsibility, 14 years of wasted opportunities. And 14 years since there has been a Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer standing at this dispatch box. Today I pay tribute to my most recent Labour predecessor, the late Lord Darling. He was an outstanding Chancellor, a kind man, and a good friend. Mr. Speaker, it is also the very first time that there has been a female Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, on my arrival at the Treasury, I learnt that there is some debate about when the first Chancellor was appointed. It was either 800 years ago, when one Ralph de Leicester was given the title of Chancellor of the Exchequer for the first time. Alternatively, 900 years ago, when Henry the Treasurer was referenced in the Domesday Book. Or even 1,000 years ago, when Alfred the Great was in effect the first Master of the Mint. Either way, I'm sure that the whole House would agree on one thing. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have waited far too long for a woman to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. And so I stand here today proud, but also deeply conscious of the responsibility that I now have. A responsibility to women across the country whose work is too often undervalued. And a responsibility to every young woman and girl who should know that there is no ceiling on their ambitions and no limit on their potential. I'll give way.
Thank you very much. 7 Tory men have stood at the dispatch box over the last 14 years, and the result has been an economic crisis, crumbling public services and a cost of living crisis. Can we expect a change of approach from the new Chancellor and female Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Well, one thing is I hope to be in post for a bit longer than some of my predecessors. Madam Deputy Speaker, as tempting as it is, I don't intend to conduct a full sweep of the 1,000 years of economic history from the dispatch box today. I'm sorry. However, we must talk about the last 14 years. I warned that whoever won the general election would inherit the worst set of economic circumstances since the Second World War. And I've seen nothing to change my mind since I arrived at the Treasury. I will update the House on our public spending inheritance before Parliament rises for recess. And I heard what the Shadow Chancellor said from the dispatch box now and on the television yesterday, to claim that I should be grateful for what he has left us. Unbelievable. Because the right honourable gentleman knows the truth, and he's now trying to rewrite history. In doing so, he has reminded the British people why the Conservatives lost the election. They're out of touch, deluded, and unable to defend the indefensible. And in the weeks ahead, it will become clear what his party did. They stored up problems, they failed to take the tough decisions, and then they ran away, leaving it to us, the Labour government, to pick up the pieces and clear up their mess. But today, I want to focus on one thing above all else: economic growth. Since 2010, Conservative Chancellor after Conservative Chancellor, including the right honourable gentleman opposite, have stressed the importance of economic growth. We've had more growth plans than we've had Prime Ministers or Chancellors, and that's quite a lot. But growth requires more than talk. It requires action. Like so much else with the previous administration, when you scratch beneath the surface, the facade crumbles, and all that is left is the evidence of 14 years of failure. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and I congratulate her on her appointment. She's making an excellent speech. Friday's ONS report showed that public sector borrowing was 25% higher than forecast. Does she agree with me that this underlines why it was so important to have a fully costed and fully funded manifesto to restore confidence in the public finances, and why it was a surprise that certain other parties did not follow the same route?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he speaks powerfully, and I want to pay tribute to the work that he did in the last Parliament, particularly around education and skills. I think it's a really important point, this, because the manifesto that we stood on, for me, the most important pages were the 3 grey pages at the back of the manifesto that set out all of our spending commitments and how they are paid for. And that was important because to earn the trust of the electorate, you have to be really clear of where the money's going to come from and what you're going to use it for. And that's what we did in our manifesto, and that's what we will do in government. Now, the right honourable gentleman, the Shadow Chancellor, made some points about GDP and comparing it with other countries. But since 2010, UK GDP per capita, and that's the most important measure because that is how people feel, the money that they have. It's grown slower than the G7 average, it's grown slower than the EU average, and it's grown slower than the OECD average. Treasury analysis that I requested when I became Chancellor shows that had the UK economy grown at the average OECD rate these last 14 years, our economy would be over £140 billion bigger today. This could have brought in an additional £58 billion of tax revenues in the last year alone, money that could have been used for our schools, our hospitals and other vital public services. Madam Deputy Speaker, growth is about more than just lines on a chart, though. It's about the money in people's pockets. And Treasury analysis shows that achieving the rate of growth of similar economies would have been worth more than £5,000 for every household in Britain. Now, the Shadow Chancellor stands up today and once again claims that he's bequeathed a great legacy. I mean, seriously, it's the first Parliament on record where living standards were lower at the end of the Parliament than they were at the start. The highest level of debt since the 1960s. The highest tax burden in 70 years. Mortgages through the roof. The economy only just recovering after last year's recession. Economic inactivity numbers last week showing a further rise. And borrowing numbers last week showing over £3 billion more borrowing than the OBR expected. That is their legacy. Madam Deputy Speaker, if that is such a good inheritance, I would hate to see what a bad one looks like. And I deep down, the Shadow Chancellor knows this. In fact, he does know it. Yesterday, the Shadow Chancellor admitted what we all know, that the manifesto that he campaigned on was undeliverable, that the money for the tax cuts that he promised simply was not there. And if the Shadow Chancellor wants to show the country that his party has listened, that they have learned from their mistakes, the Shadow Chancellor would have used his speech this afternoon to apologise, but he didn't. And it tells you everything you need to know about this Conservative Party. Party first, country second. Political self-interest ahead of the national interest. Irresponsibility before the public good. So let me say this to the Conservative Party. We will not stop holding you responsible for the damage that you have done to our economy and to our country. Never again will we allow them to crash our economy. They failed this country, they shied away from tough choices, and we won't repeat their mistakes. So it falls on us, this new Labour government, to fix the foundations, so we can rebuild Britain and make every part of our country better off. We will govern through actions, not words, and we have already begun to do just that, because there is no time to waste. Less than 72 hours after I was appointed as Chancellor, I put growth at the very heart of our work. Working alongside my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, I set out reforms to our planning system, reforms that the party opposite didn't deliver in 14 years. Restoring mandatory targets to build the homes that we desperately need, ending the absurd ban on onshore wind to deliver homegrown, cheaper energy, and recovering planning appeals for key projects that have been sitting on the desks of government ministers in the last Parliament for far too long. Tough decisions that the Conservative Party already opposes. Why was this my first act as Chancellor? Because getting our economy growing is urgent. And this King's speech shows that we are getting to work. I'll happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful. On the matter of mandatory housing targets, having been a constituency MP for 23 years and seen this tried a number of different ways, could I humbly offer to her in all sincerity, there is such a thing as good development, but it only works if it's something that you do with people and not to people. And this Stalinist approach won't work.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll be compared to a lot of things, but never compared to Joseph Stalin. Now, our approach is a brownfield-first approach, and we will reintroduce those mandatory targets, but of course it's up to local authorities and local communities to decide where the housing should be built. But the answer can't always be no, because if the answer is always no, we'll continue as we are, with home ownership declining and mortgages and rents going through the roof. And on this side of the House, we are not willing to tolerate this. Now, this King's speech shows that we are getting to work. As my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, set out, our programme for government will be founded on principles of security, fairness and opportunity. And our number one mission is to secure sustained economic growth in our great country through a new partnership between government, business and working people, which prioritises wealth creation for all of our communities. We will fix the foundations of our economy so we can rebuild Britain and make every part of our country better off. There are a number of important pieces of legislation in the King's speech that will help us to grow the economy. Today I want to focus on three in particular. The Budget Responsibility Bill to restore economic stability, the National Wealth Fund Bill to drive investment, and the Pension Scheme Bill to reform our economy. Because they speak not just to our programme for government, but also to trust in politics. They show that we will govern as we campaigned, and we will meet our promises to the British people. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the election campaign, I said that the first step that we would take would be to restore economic stability, because stability is the precondition to a healthy and growing economy. It is how we keep taxes, inflation and mortgages as low as possible. After years of irresponsibility, we are putting our economy on firm ground once again. We introduced the new Budget Responsibility Bill on Thursday to deliver on our manifesto commitment to introduce a fiscal lock so that I can keep an iron grip on our country's finances. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful to the Chancellor. Thanks very much indeed. She and I sat on the Treasury Select Committee together many years ago, and she will know from our time together that economics is as much art as it is science. So given that she's effectively giving a veto over economic policy to the OBR through this bill, she must recognise that we need to understand what the people in the OBR believe, what their theories of economics are, what principles they attach themselves to. So what further scrutiny will be available for this House, for the chair of the OBR and the people who are doing the forecast, given that effectively they will be co-chancellor with her during the next few years?
Well, look, the Treasury Select Committee, as the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, can call in the Chair and other members of the Office of Budget Responsibility. But the comments from the Right Honourable Gentleman show exactly why we need this bill, so that never again can we have a repeat of the mini-budget. Now, this bill will require every announcement which makes significant and permanent changes to tax and spending to be subject to an independent assessment by the Office of Budget Responsibility. Why? Because unfunded, reckless commitments don't just threaten our public finances, they threaten people's incomes and they threaten people's mortgages. We saw that in the wake of the mini-budget presided over by the former member for South West Norfolk. Now, I understand that she's taken umbrage in recent days at the idea that this episode was disastrous. Well, if any member on the opposition benches would like to dispute that fact today, I'd be more than happy to give way. They cheered at the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, but they're not cheering it now, and I don't imagine they put that on their leaflets. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, they should be ashamed. They should be ashamed of what they did, because people up and down the country are still paying the price for the chaos that they caused. But we say never again. And the Budget Responsibility Bill will enshrine that commitment in law.
Will my right honourable friend give way?
I will give way, yes.
Well, those from the party opposite during the pandemic were awarded, their friends and family were awarded contracts for work that were never fulfilled. And my constituents in York Outer would love to know how can we get their money back, perhaps through the role of the COVID Corruption Commissioner.
Well, I enjoyed campaigning for my honourable friend in York Outer, and it's great to see him in his place today. Madam Deputy Speaker, stability means a tough set of fiscal rules, but it also means spending public money wisely, as my honourable friend says. The past government hiked taxes while allowing waste and inefficiency to spiral out of control. Nowhere was this more evident than during the pandemic, especially when it came to PPE, because the former Prime Minister, when he was Chancellor, signed cheque after cheque after cheque for billions of pounds worth of contracts that did not deliver for the NHS when it needed it. And that is simply unacceptable. So today I can announce that I am beginning the process to appoint a COVID Corruption Commissioner to get back what is owed to the British people. Because that money today in the hands of fraudsters belongs in our public services, and we want that money back. The Commissioner will report to me, working with the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, and their report will be presented to Parliament for all members to see. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will not tolerate waste. I will treat taxpayers' money with respect, and I will return stability to our public finances. Madam Deputy Speaker, the second bill I want to speak to today is the National Wealth Fund Bill. We know that economic stability is vital for investors and for business. The small business looking to grow, the global business looking to expand in the UK, the entrepreneur looking to take their first steps. And to support them, stability must sit alongside investment. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Chancellor for giving way, and I wonder, in relation to the effective use of public funds, whether she's aware not only of the alleged corruption of the way in which COVID aid was distributed, but if you look at the way that, in fact, a large number of tax loopholes exist in this economy. For example, in Cornwall, over £500 million of taxpayers' money was handed out to holiday homeowners, not only through COVID aid, but also through the small business rate relief scheme, and indeed other tax loopholes, whilst at the same time only a third of that amount has gone into social housing for first-time users. So will the Chancellor look indeed at the whole issue of parity of the way in which public funds are used in order to support people who need housing?
Well, I would like to welcome the honourable member back to this place. I enjoyed sparring with him in my early days in Parliament, and it's great to see him back in the House. And the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that we need to get value for money for all tax incentives, and I will make sure that the Treasury, but also the Department, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government looks at the changes that he suggests. The last government's record on investment was dismal. We now sit behind every single member of the G7 when it comes to business investment as a share of GDP. Now, that isn't an abstract economic problem. Weak investment holds back productivity and it hurts living standards. It leaves households poorer and it leaves wages lower. So this King's Speech deals directly with the need to unlock private investment through a new National Wealth Fund bill. This will be supported by an injection of capital, part funded by an increase to the windfall tax on oil and gas giants. It will make transformative investments in industries of the future, like carbon capture and storage and green hydrogen. It will mobilise billions of pounds worth of additional private sector investment in our industrial heartlands and coastal communities, while generating a return for taxpayers. The National Wealth Fund will work with local partners, including mayors, as well as the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, to develop an investment offer which meets the needs of all of our nations and regions. It will simplify a complex landscape of support for businesses today, aligning key institutions like the UK Infrastructure Bank and the British Business Bank under one banner of the National Wealth Fund.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to her, and I heartily applaud what she's saying about the renewed windfall tax. Will she also look at the fact that in this country we actually have the lowest basic rate of tax at 38%, I believe, on oil and gas companies anywhere in the world. The average is 74%. In this country, it has been 38%. Will she look at that?
Well, we committed in our manifesto, as the honourable gentleman knows, to have a 3 percentage point uplift from the current energy profits levy. And we will use that to fund the National Wealth Fund. The National Wealth Fund will power jobs and prosperity in all parts of our country. And this work is already well underway. I welcomed the report of the National Wealth Fund Task Force in my first week in office. And I want to thank the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and the whole task force for their outstanding work. This bill will put the National Wealth Fund onto a statutory footing with clear objectives, crowding in private investment to create wealth right across Britain.
Will the Chancellor give way?
I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Chancellor for giving way. Under the Conservatives, businesses and working people were held back by a complete and abject failure to build the new homes that my constituents in Ealing Southall were crying out for, the laboratory spaces that will provide the jobs of the future, and the national infrastructure needed for businesses and working people to prosper. Will she assure this House that under her chancellorship we will finally get Britain building again?
Yeah. I welcome the election of my honourable friend in Ealing Southall, and I think her constituents in this whole House can see what a strong advocate will be for her local community. My honourable friend is absolutely right. We've got to get Britain building again. We've got to build the homes, the transport infrastructure, the energy infrastructure and the digital infrastructure that our country desperately needs. I'm very happy to take an intervention.
The Chancellor for giving way, but for giving me a chance to be intervened. But I can also ask the Chancellor this point. And when it comes to rebuilding and the house building programme that the Right Honourable Lady has suggested should happen, in the papers today it suggests that people who are on a £70,000 mortgage, £70,000 wage can't get a mortgage. In Northern Ireland, those on a smaller wage can't get a mortgage either. So can I ask the Chancellor this direct and hopefully positive question with a positive answer? Is it possible that the issue of mortgages and access to mortgages for those who want to have accommodation rather than rental accommodation, that can happen? And what can the Chancellor do to make sure that everyone in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland can benefit? As the Honourable Lady has quite clearly said, they will. Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. One of the biggest challenges people have in getting a mortgage is building up the deposit. And that's why we've committed to a mortgage guarantee scheme to help those people who can't rely on the bank of mum and dad to be able to get on the housing ladder. That's a really important commitment, as well as that commitment to build the homes. Because frankly, unless you build more homes, you're going to find that home ownership continues to go backwards, as it did in the last few years. Alongside the stability and investment in our economy must come reform. Because to deliver economic growth requires tough choices. It means taking on vested interests and confronting issues that politicians have too often avoided. The last government refused to engage with these choices, and they refused to level with the British people about what was required. This government will be different. We've demonstrated that already with a series of reforms to our planning system, and we are bringing forward further legislation in the King's Speech to get Britain building. Today, I want to focus on another area of our economy where reform is vital: our pension schemes. People across our country work hard to save for the future. They want a better, more secure retirement with the most generous pension possible. At the same time, British businesses with high growth potential need capital to support their expansion. Pension funds are at the heart of this. There will soon be over £800 billion of assets in defined contribution pension schemes. But for too long, these assets have not been targeted towards UK markets. That has impacted British savers and it has impacted British business. The last government said that this was a problem too, and I welcome that acknowledgement. But they never introduced the legislation needed to make the change. We believe in deeds, not words, so we will strengthen investment from private pension providers by bringing forward the Pension Schemes Bill in the King's Speech. It will boost pension pots by over £11,000 through a new and improved value for money framework. And through an investment shift in DC schemes, just a 1% shift in asset allocation could deliver £8 billion of new productive investment into the UK economy. To ensure that the bill is as strong as possible, I am today launching a pensions investment review, led by the first ever joint Commons Minister appointed between the Treasury and the Department for Work and Pensions, the Honourable Member for Wickham, the Pensions Minister. This will include a review of the local government pension scheme, the 7th largest pension fund in the world, to ensure it is getting the best value from the savings of nearly 7 million public sector workers, the majority of whom are women and the majority of whom are low paid. They deserve a pension that is working for them. Together, these reforms will kickstart economic growth by unlocking investment which has been tied up for too long. I've already given way to the honourable gentleman. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know...
Could I just urge the House to think about interventions, because there is a very long list of members who want to speak and lots of people who want to make their maiden speech, and it would be great if you could all get in.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, you'll be pleased to know that I won't apprise the House of every bill which supports economic growth in the King's Speech, but needless to say, there are many more. From the English Devolution Bill to transfer power back into the hands of local communities, to the Employment Rights Bill to make work pay, and the Great British Energy Bill to take back control of our country's energy and create new jobs across the United Kingdom. Growing our economy flows through almost every word of this address. Madam Deputy Speaker, the British people put their trust in us on the 4th of July to fix the foundations of our economy, to rebuild Britain, and to make every part of our great country better off. I do not take that trust for granted. We will not let people down, and I am ready to deliver the change that we need. I know it will take time. I know it will require hard work, but we are already getting on with the job. By ending a reckless, chaotic approach to economic management, by putting politics back in the service of working people, and by making economic growth our fundamental mission. Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend the address to the House.
Sarah Olney, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and it's a real pleasure to be contributing to this debate on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, not just because I'm speaking on behalf of so many more of them than I used to, but also because it gives me an opportunity to welcome the Chancellor of the Exchequer to her place, to express my personal congratulations on becoming the first woman in the UK's history to hold the position. I'm personally delighted. I've spent many years working in banking and finance. I know how male-dominated those industries still are, and I wish the Honourable Lady well in her new role and look forward to working with her over the coming Parliament. The Liberal Democrats will be vigorous in scrutinising her plans, but we will always work in the national interest, and I can assure her of the support of these benches on all those matters on which we can agree. And I'm sure that one of the things on which we can certainly agree is that the Honourable Lady and her colleagues have received a dismal inheritance from the departing Conservative administration. The numbers reveal a dispiriting picture of low growth, high interest rates and a record fall in living standards, delivered by an out-of-touch and incompetent Conservative Party that took people for granted for years. Our constituents see this situation reflected in the increases in their mortgage payments, the hike in their energy bills, the prices they pay at the tills for their weekly shop. They see it in public services that are in a state of crisis and an NHS that is failing to deliver the care they need. Liberal Democrats welcome the sense of seriousness with which this King's Speech focuses on stability, reinvesting in our crippled public services and growing the economy. And while we welcome measures such as the introduction of an Industrial Strategy Council to coordinate policy on economic growth, the immediate and pressing problems that our constituents are facing in their everyday lives cannot just be addressed by centralised top-down institutions run from Whitehall. Our economy needs to grow from the bottom up, bringing prosperity to every community, taking away the barriers to entry for small businesses and enabling individuals all across the country to make the most of their skills and talents. And Liberal Democrats wants to see urgent measures introduced which will give immediate support to families and small businesses. While we were out on the doorsteps for the general election campaign, myself and my 71 colleagues heard clearly the message from our constituents that their biggest priority was fixing the NHS. We are here because we promised to fight hard for a better NHS for our constituents and for communities across the country, and that is why we are calling for the Chancellor to immediately draw up a budget for health and social care. Because you can't deliver economic growth without fixing the crisis in our NHS and in social care. NHS waiting lists are at an all-time high. It can take weeks to see a GP, and it is now almost impossible to see an NHS dentist. Everyone deserves access to the care they need, when they need it and where they need it. A successful health and social care system is fundamental to a fair society and our country's prosperity. And the failures of the Conservative administration led to a dramatic increase in the number of people experiencing long-term sickness conditions, and the Liberal Democrats will continue to push for public service investment to help reduce NHS waiting lists to get people back to work.
My honourable friend give way.
With pleasure.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that reforming social care is one of the most urgent priorities of this government? The Cornwall Hospital Trust recently announced that £26 million a year is spent on patients who are medically well but are unable to be discharged due to a lack of social care packages.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. He's absolutely right, of course, and it's wonderful to see him in his place, and the people of North Cornwall will be well served by his championing of social care in particular, and that is why it was front and centre of the Liberal Democrat manifesto in the general election. The most direct way to alleviate poverty is to increase the money paid to the poorest households. We know that those of our fellow citizens currently living in the severest poverty are likely to be families with small children. Growing up in poverty affects children's educational chances and is likely to impact their physical and mental health, holding them back from achieving their true potential. Taking immediate steps to tackle child poverty should therefore be a priority. We believe that removing the two-child cap is the most cost-effective way of immediately lifting 500,000 children out of poverty, while helping to make costs more manageable for parents. This would have a direct benefit to families struggling with a cost-of-living crisis. Not only do we have a moral obligation to change this unnecessary policy, but it's the most cost-effective way of alleviating poverty with a broad range of economic advantages, including supporting more parents back into the workforce. So I urge the Chancellor of the Exchequer to remove the two-child limit on social security payments in her first budget to ensure that all families who need it receive immediate reassurance and support. But families of all sizes are suffering under the cost of living crisis and desperately need help. Our schools are increasingly having to battle the effects of poverty to ensure that children are able to attend school and have the best possible chance of reaching their potential. And too many children are distracted from their lessons because they haven't had enough to eat. The Liberal Democrats set out plans in their manifesto for free school meals for all children living in poverty, with an ambition to extend them to all children once public finances allow. The Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to consider funding free school meals as a priority to alleviate the pressure on the finances of the families who are struggling the most, and it will contribute to positive educational outcomes that will benefit us all in the future. The Liberal Democrats welcome many of the measures in the King's speech that aim to boost economic growth, and we support the government's objectives to make this a priority. We welcome moves to boost stability and to provide strategic leadership via an Industrial Strategy Council and to increase investment through pension reform. However, our small businesses and our local high streets need immediate support, and the government needs to do more to ensure that economic growth can reach every part of the United Kingdom and that small businesses and entrepreneurs can quickly rediscover the confidence that they need to invest after years of Conservative chaos and mismanagement. Liberal Democrats want to see more direct support which will impact local community businesses. We believe we need swift action specifically to tackle high energy costs, and we continue to call for business rate reform. A new Parliament represents a real opportunity to begin to properly rebuild our trading relationships with Europe. And in speaking with many small business owners, I understand the pressures and limitations that current trade deals with Europe pose to businesses. We must tackle the arduous legislation surrounding importing and exporting goods, which significantly limits the opportunities for small businesses to grow. The Liberal Democrats have a comprehensive plan to rebuild trust and cooperation with Europe, and we understand this to be a crucial aspect of the support which businesses urgently need. We welcome the government's acknowledgement of the need to reform the apprenticeship levy. However, we'd like to see them go further and replace the current scheme with a broader and more flexible skills and training levy. And we hope the government will join us in encouraging the take-up of apprenticeships, particularly for young people, in supporting our calls to guarantee they are paid at least the national minimum wage by scrapping the lower apprentice rate. We understand the broad economic benefits of supporting the development of skilled workers and are optimistic of the advantages that this could bring to business. The recent years of chaos and irresponsible Conservative administration has left a substantial challenge for the new government to tackle. We do not underestimate the work which lies ahead of us, getting the economy back up and running, nurturing an environment which will allow businesses to thrive, and restoring the public services which provide care for people when they need it. My Liberal Democrat colleagues and I will hold the new government to account to ensure that they deliver on the promises which were outlined by His Majesty on Wednesday as we work to rectify the damage done by the Conservatives, rebuild our economy by supporting individual communities, small businesses and urgently investing in health and social care. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I think it is